My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 34 years old, a financial analyst, and I live in Seattle. Sometimes I wonder if people see me at all, or if I am just the shadow that moves quietly through their lives. I have always been the one who blends into the background, the one who listens more than she speaks. Maybe it started with my parents. They came to America in 1987, carrying everything they owned in 2 suitcases and a plastic bag of hope. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital, my father drove cabs at night, and I learned early that survival meant being invisible, careful, and never asking for too much. By the time I was 16, I was working after school at a local grocery store, saving every dollar. I put myself through the University of Washington on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating top of my class in 2013. I still remember the feeling of signing the papers for my first condo at 26. It cost $312,000, a number that felt both terrifying and triumphant. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I built something of my own, maybe I would finally be enough. For myself, for my family, and for the world that always seemed to be measuring and weighing me. But when I married Ethan, I stepped into a different kind of scrutiny. His family is old Seattle, the kind that has holiday photos in the same house for 3 generations. His mother, Margaret, is the sort of woman who can make you feel small with a glance. At our first Thanksgiving, she leaned across the table and asked, "So, Olivia, what do your parents do?" Her smile was polite, but her eyes flickered to Ethan's sister, who was already married to a surgeon. I felt the old shame rise up in me, the sense that my story would never be enough. My father is retired now, and my mother still works at the hospital, but somehow that answer always seemed to disappoint. Every holiday, every family gathering, I felt like I was being auditioned for a role I had never wanted. Margaret would mention the private schools Ethan and his siblings attended, the family trust, the vacations in Sun Valley. Sometimes she would pause, as if waiting for me to offer up credentials I didn't have. I learned to smile, to nod, to swallow the sting. I tried to fit in, to be gracious, to ignore the comparisons. But there were moments, quiet, sharp moments, when I saw the way they looked at me, like I was a temporary guest, not quite belonging. Even Ethan, for all his kindness, didn't see the pressure I felt. He would say, "Don't let it get to you. They're just old-fashioned." But he didn't hear the way his mother sighed when I mentioned my work. He didn't see the way his father's eyes glazed over when I talked about the new investment portfolio I was managing. Last year, when I got my promotion and a $22,000 raise, I wanted to celebrate. But at dinner, Margaret barely looked up from her wine. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear? Emily's husband just made partner at his firm." Sometimes I wonder if I am invisible, or if invisibility is just the price of being different. I have spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, to earn a seat at tables that were never meant for me. I know I am not alone in this. How many of us have felt the weight of other people's expectations, the sting of being measured and found wanting? Where do we draw the line between belonging and losing ourselves? I would love to hear how others have navigated these silent battles. The crisis came at my brother's wedding, an event that should have been a celebration but instead became the sharpest wound I'd felt in years. The ceremony was held at the Lakewood Country Club, a sprawling venue with manicured lawns and a guest list of nearly 200. It was the kind of wedding my parents could never have afforded, but my brother, Daniel, had always been the golden child. He'd landed a tech job straight out of college, and his fiancée Lauren came from a family with deep roots in Bellevue. My parents beamed with pride, and I tried to share their happiness even as I felt myself fading into the background. A month before the wedding, Daniel called me. His voice was hesitant. "Liv, Lauren's parents want the bridal party to be just family and close friends. There are a lot of people, and the numbers are tight. I hope you understand." I laughed it off at the time. "Of course," I said. "I'm just happy for you." But when the invitation arrived, my name was listed not as maid of honor or even as a bridesmaid, but simply as Olivia Bennett and guest. I stared at the envelope for a long time. My own brother's wedding, and I was just another name on the list. I tried not to let it bother me. I bought a new dress, $320, more than I'd spent on clothes in months. I chose a gift from their registry, a set of crystal wine glasses for $180. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was there for Daniel, not for the spotlight. But as the day approached, I felt the old ache of being overlooked, of being the afterthought. The reception was a blur of champagne and speeches. I sat at table 14, near the back, with distant relatives and a few college friends I barely remembered. I watched as Lauren's sisters, all in matching pale blue dresses, floated from table to table, laughing and posing for photos. When it was time for the family toast, Daniel and Lauren stood at the head table, flanked by their parents and siblings. I stayed seated, unsure if I was even meant to join them. Then came the moment that still burns in my memory. Lauren took the microphone, her voice bright and clear. "We're so grateful for everyone who helped make this day possible." She smiled at her parents, at Daniel's best friend, at her maid of honor, and of course, thank you to everyone who contributed to our honeymoon fund. We're so lucky to have such generous friends and family. There was a ripple of applause. I glanced at the gift table, where a large envelope with my handwriting sat unopened. I had contributed $2,500 to their honeymoon fund, a sum I'd saved for months, wanting to do something special for Daniel. But my name was never mentioned. Later, I overheard Lauren talking to her mother. "Olivia. Oh, she's just Ethan's wife. I don't really know her that well." The words hit me harder than I expected. I felt my cheeks flush, my hands trembling around my glass. I wanted to disappear, to slip out into the night and leave the whole scene behind. I thought of all the times I'd helped Daniel, covering his rent when he lost his job, lending him $2,000 for his car repairs, never once asking for it back. I thought of the holidays I'd hosted, the birthdays I'd remembered, the quiet ways I'd tried to show I cared. As the night wore on, I found myself standing outside on the patio, the sounds of laughter and music drifting through the doors. I watched Daniel and Lauren dance, surrounded by people who seemed to fit so easily into the world I'd always felt shut out from. I wondered if I would ever belong, or if I was destined to always be the outsider, the one who gave and gave but was never truly seen. When Ethan found me, I tried to smile. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but inside I was unraveling. I wanted to ask him if he saw me, if he understood what it felt like to be invisible in your own family. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, clutching my empty glass, watching the lights flicker on the water and wondering how much more of myself I could give before I disappeared completely. Have you ever felt like a guest at your own family's table? Like no matter what you do, you'll always be standing just outside the circle. Sometimes I wonder if we ever really stop trying to earn our place, or if we just learn to live with the ache. I barely slept that night after the wedding. I lay in the guest room at my parents' house, staring at the ceiling as the hours crawled by. The laughter and music from the reception still echoed in my ears, but now it sounded distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I kept replaying Lauren's words, the way she'd dismissed me as just Ethan's wife, the way Daniel hadn't even looked for me during the family photos. My chest felt tight, my stomach hollow. I kept thinking, how did I get here? When did I become invisible to the people I loved most? The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a heaviness I couldn't shake. I scrolled through my phone, half expecting some kind of message. A thank you, an apology, even just a "did you get home safe?" But there was nothing, only a group text from Lauren's sister, a photo of the bridal party with the caption, "Best night ever." I wasn't in the picture. Of course I wasn't. I kept thinking about the $1,500 I'd given them for their honeymoon. It was more than I'd spent on myself in months. I justified it as a gesture of love, a way to show Daniel I was happy for him, even if I wasn't part of the inner circle. But now it felt like a transaction gone wrong, a payment for a seat at a table I'd never be invited to. I remembered, too, the $2,000 I'd loaned him for his car repairs last spring, the $300 I'd slipped into his account when he was short on rent in 2019. I'd always told myself it was what family did, but was it really family, or was it just me trying to buy my way into their affection? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming. I remembered the Thanksgiving 2 years ago when I'd spent 3 days cooking, only to have Margaret take over the kitchen at the last minute. "Let me handle the turkey, Olivia. You can do the salad." I'd smiled, swallowed the sting, told myself it didn't matter. I remembered Ethan's birthday last year, when his sister forgot to bring a gift, and I covered for her, telling everyone it was from both of us. I remembered the time I'd driven 2 hours in the rain to help Daniel move, only to be introduced to his friends as my brother's wife. The memories piled up, each one sharper than the last. I felt like I was drowning in them, unable to breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand that someone see me, really see me, for once. But instead, I went silent. I stopped answering calls, let texts go unanswered. I told Ethan I was tired, that I needed space. He looked at me with confusion, maybe even hurt. "Why are you being so cold?" he asked one night, his voice low. I wanted to tell him everything, the pain, the humiliation, the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just said, "I just need time." Inside, though, I was unraveling. I kept running the numbers in my head the way I always do when I'm anxious. The $2,400 mortgage I'd covered when Ethan was between jobs, the $500 I'd sent his sister for her emergencies, the $78,000 I'd managed to save over the years, now sitting in a joint account that suddenly felt less safe, less mine. I thought about all the times I'd put everyone else first, convinced myself that sacrifice was love, that giving was the only way to belong. But now, for the first time, I wondered if I was just being used. The thought made me sick. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that family meant something, that all the small kindnesses added up to something real. But the evidence was there, in every overlooked invitation, every forgotten thank you, every time I was left out of the photo, the conversation, the memory. I started to pull back. I froze the joint account, moved my savings into a separate one. I told myself it was just for a little while, just until I could think clearly. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was a line in the sand, a way to reclaim something of myself. I stopped offering to help, stopped volunteering for every family event. I let Ethan handle his own family's crises, his own sister's emergencies. I watched as the calls and texts slowed, then stopped altogether. At first, the silence was terrifying. I'd built my whole life around being needed, being useful. Without that, who was I? Was I selfish for wanting something back, for wanting to be seen? Was I the villain for drawing boundaries, for saying no, or was I finally seeing the truth that love without respect is just another kind of loneliness? I thought about my parents, how hard they'd worked to give me a better life. I wondered if they'd ever felt this way, if they'd ever questioned their place in the world they'd sacrificed so much to enter. I remembered my mother's hands, rough from years of cleaning, her quiet pride when I bought my first condo. "You did this, Olivia," she'd said. "No one can take that from you." But now, it felt like even that wasn't enough. I spent hours walking the city, letting the rain soak through my coat. I watched couples in coffee shops, families in the park, and wondered how many of them carried the same ache I did. I thought about calling Daniel, about telling him how much he'd hurt me. But every time I picked up the phone, I froze. What would I even say? That I wanted to be more than a line on a guest list, more than a bank account to be tapped in emergencies, that I wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who I was, not just what I could give. The questions circled in my mind, relentless and unanswerable. I felt torn between responsibility and self-respect, between the family I'd been born into and the one I'd married into. I wanted to believe that I could have both, that I could belong without losing myself. But now, I wasn't so sure. One night, I sat at my kitchen table, the city lights flickering outside the window. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, the neat columns of numbers that had always made sense to me. But for the first time, they felt meaningless. What was the value of a gift unacknowledged, a sacrifice unseen? What was the point of giving, if it only left you empty? I closed the laptop, sat in the quiet, and let myself feel the weight of it all. The disappointment, the anger, the grief. I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I had to start choosing myself, even if it meant standing alone. Have you ever reached that point, the moment when you realize that loving others doesn't mean losing yourself? That sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is draw a line and say, "Enough." I wonder how many of us have been there, quietly, in the dark, waiting for someone to notice that we're missing. Part 4, Climax, the unexpected truth. The family meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon, the kind of crisp Seattle day where sunlight glints off the Space Needle like a warning. They'd all gathered in the living room of my house, the one they'd spent weeks discussing renovations for, the one they assumed belonged to Ethan. His parents arrived first, Margaret in a tweed blazer that cost more than my first car, Richard clutching a leather-bound folder of plans. Ethan's sister, Claire, brought a contractor friend who kept nodding at their ideas like a bobblehead. I sat in the armchair by the fireplace, silent, watching them rearrange my furniture as if it were their own. "Olivia, sweetheart," Margaret began, her tone dripping with condescension. "We've drawn up a proposal for the renovations. The loan's already approved, $120,000 at 4.5% interest. We just need signatures to finalize." She slid a document toward me, her French tip nail tapping the line where my name would go. I glanced at the paperwork. They'd listed Ethan as the homeowner, of course they had. Richard leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "We're thinking of expanding the kitchen, adding a guest suite. Claire's friend here says it could boost the value by $200K. Claire chimed in, "And Mom wants the patio redone in limestone. You'll love it, Liv. It'll finally look proper." Proper. The word hung in the air, sharp as a knife. I thought of the cracked patio tiles I'd saved for, the ones I'd installed myself with a YouTube tutorial and blistered hands. Ethan shifted beside me, uneasy. Liv, you okay? I didn't answer. Let them talk. Let them believe. The doorbell rang. Margaret frowned. Are we expecting someone else? And Simescos. I stood, smoothing my sweater. That'll be the notary. Silence fell. Ethan's eyes widened. Notary? Why? The contractor, sensing tension, excused himself. The notary, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense ponytail, entered, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. Ms. Bennett, I'm here to witness the signing. Margaret's laugh was brittle. There's been a mistake. The homeowner is my son. The notary glanced at her paperwork. No, ma'am. The deed lists Olivia Bennett as sole owner, purchased in 2017 for $625,000, with a 20% down payment, no co-signers. The room froze. Claire's wine glass clinked against the table. Richard's face turned the color of old chalk. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. I reached into the drawer beside me, pulling out the original deed. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink faded where I'd signed it 8 years ago. Alone in a lawyer's office after months of saving every spare dollar. Ethan stared at me. Liv, why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? I said quietly. You never asked. Margaret found her voice. This is preposterous. Ethan's name should be on this house. You're married. Community property laws don't apply here. The notary said briskly. The house was purchased before marriage and remains in Miss Bennett's name exclusively. Claire shot up, her chair screeching. You've been letting us pay the mortgage all this time, while you owned it. I met her glare. I've paid every cent of the $2,400 monthly mortgage since day one. You borrowed $500 from me last month for your emergency vet bill. Should I pull up the Venmo history? Richard slammed a fist on the table. Enough. Olivia, this is no way to treat family. We're trying to improve your asset. My asset, I repeated. Funny how it's suddenly mine when you need something. Margaret's composure cracked. You've manipulated us, letting us think. Think what? My voice rose sharp and clear. That I was just the quiet little immigrant's daughter who got lucky. That I couldn't possibly have built this on my own. Ethan reached for my hand. Liv, please. I pulled away. You knew. Deep down, you all knew. But it was easier to pretend I was nobody. To take my money, my time, my silence, and still treat me like I didn't belong. The room buzzed with tension. Claire looked at her phone, avoiding my gaze. Richard muttered about consulting a lawyer. Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped her pearls. The notary cleared her throat. Miss Bennett, would you like to proceed? I picked up the pen. Actually, there's been a change of plans. I won't be refinancing. Margaret gasped. You can't. I can. I turned to the notary. Please draft a notice of termination for the loan application, effective immediately. As the notary packed up, Ethan stood, his voice raw. Liv, we need to talk. Alone. In the backyard, the autumn wind whipped through the maple trees I'd planted myself. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Why keep this a secret? Were you testing us? I laughed bitterly. Testing? No. I was surviving. Every time your mother asked about my humble job, every time your sister joked about my thrift store chic wardrobe, I told myself it didn't matter. That if I worked harder, gave more, proved more. My voice broke, but you never saw me, not really. He flinched. That's not true. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a photo from last Christmas. There I was, half cropped out of the frame, holding a platter of tamales I'd spent hours making. Your mom posted this. Caption said, family and helpers. Ethan paled. I didn't know. Of course not, you never do. Inside, Margaret's shrill voice carried through the window. She's tearing this family apart. I turned to Ethan. I'm done being the shadow in your family's story. The house stays mine. If you want to stay too, things change. No more emergency loans, no more snide remarks, and your parents, they don't get a key anymore. He stared at me, really stared for the first time in years. What if I can't promise that? Then you know where the door is. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of falling leaves. When we returned inside, Margaret opened her mouth, but I cut her off. The meeting's over. You can show yourselves out. Claire scoffed. You're kicking us out of Ethan's house. I smiled, cold and steady. My house, and yes. As their car engines faded, I sank onto the porch steps, the weight of their judgment lifted, replaced by a hollow ache. I'd won, but it felt like losing. Ethan sat beside me. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't answer. The sunset painted the sky in bruised purples and golds, and I wondered if forgiveness was a price I could afford. Later, I'd ask myself, When did family become a transaction? When did love become collateral? But for now, I just sat there, watching the light fade, and wondered who I'd be when the sun rose. Part 5. Confrontation and Boundaries. The air in the house felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. Ethan's family had regrouped in the driveway, their voices a muffled argument behind closed car doors. Inside, Ethan stood by the fireplace, his shoulders tense while I lingered at the window, watching maple leaves skitter across the porch. He spoke first. "You humiliated them." I turned slowly. "No, they humiliated themselves. You could have told me about the house." His voice cracked, equal parts anger and hurt. "Were you ever going to mention it?" I crossed my arms, the wool of my sweater scratchy against my skin. "When would it have come up, Ethan? During the 5 years your mother called my career a cute hobby, or when your sister asked me to co-sign her car loan because she trusted me more than the bank." He flinched. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, sharp and brittle. "Fair was covering your student loan payments for 8 months when you quit your job. Fair was transferring $15,000 from my savings to fix your parents' roof last winter. Fair doesn't exist here, only convenience." He sank onto the couch, running a hand over his face. "So what now? You kick everyone out and live here alone?" "No," I sat across from him, back straight. "Now we set rules. No more loans without written agreements. No more unsolicited advice about my home. And your parents don't get to dictate holidays here anymore." His head snapped up. "Their family, Olivia. Family doesn't treat people like ATMs." I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app. "Look, $2,400 a month for the mortgage, $500 to Claire in June for her emergency spa weekend, $1,200 to your dad for the golf club fees he forgot to tell your mom about." I tossed the phone onto the coffee table. "I'm not a charity. I'm not a doormat. Not anymore." The front door burst open. Margaret stormed in, her Chanel handbag swinging like a weapon. "This is absurd. You can't cut us out of decisions about Ethan's future." Richard followed, face flushed. "We'll contest the ownership. You can't try." My voice cut through his bluster. "The deed's ironclad, bought with my savings, my credit, but go ahead, hire a lawyer. Let's see how your Sun Valley friends react when the court hears you tried to steal your daughter-in-law's property." Claire hovered in the doorway, her earlier bravado gone. We didn't know." "You never asked." I stood, facing them all. "You assumed, just like you assumed I'd fund your emergencies, host your parties, swallow your insults. Well, the free ride ends today." Margaret's composure shattered. "You're tearing this family apart." "No." I stepped closer, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You did that the first time you called me Ethan's little project at Thanksgiving. You did it every time you treated me like a background character in my own life." Ethan stood abruptly. "Enough, Mom, Dad. Go home. We'll talk later." "We?" Margaret's laugh was shrill. "She's poisoned you against us." "No," Ethan said quietly. I just finally opened my eyes. The room stilled. Claire stared at her shoes. Richard muttered something about ungrateful millennials before stalking out. Margaret lingered, her gaze darting between Ethan and me as if waiting for one of us to crumble. When neither did, she hissed, "You'll regret this," and slammed the door. Claire hesitated. "Liv, I'm sorry. About the vet bill thing, I'll pay you back." I nodded stiffly. "Venmo works." When she left, Ethan and I stood in the wreckage of the afternoon. The grandfather clock ticked loudly, counting seconds we'd never get back. "You were right," he said finally. "About all of it." I sank into the armchair, exhaustion seeping into my bones. "Doesn't make it easier." He knelt beside me, his hand hovering over mine. "What do you need?" I studied his face, the man I'd loved, the man who'd let me fade into his shadow. "Space-time. Couples counseling if you're serious about fixing this." He swallowed. "And if I am? Then you tell your mother to stop texting me passive-aggressive Bible verses and you start seeing me as your partner, not your backup plan." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I can try." Later, as dusk painted the walls in shades of gray, I wandered through the empty house. In the kitchen, I traced the chip in the countertop from Claire's champagne bottle last New Year's. In the guest room, I straightened the photo of Ethan's grandparents, the one Margaret had repositioned 3 times during her last visit. I stopped at the patio doors, watching twilight swallow the garden. For years, I'd pruned roses I hated because Margaret said they were classic. Tomorrow, I'd rip them out and plant peonies, messy, bright, unapologetically mine. Upstairs, Ethan's suitcase lay open on the bed. He'd packed quietly, said he'd stay with a friend until things settle. I didn't cry, didn't beg, just handed him a spare key, revocable, conditional, and watched his taillights disappear. That night, I sat at the kitchen island with a glass of Malbec and a spreadsheet. Line by line, I deleted the automatic transfers to Ethan's family, $500 here, $1,000 there. The total saved at $2,300 a month. Enough for a solo trip to Bali. Enough to start over. The house creaked around me. No longer a stage for their performances, but a silent witness to my resurrection. I wondered if this was how freedom felt. Terrifying, exhilarating, and unbearably lonely. Now I ask you, how much of yourself have you buried to keep others comfortable? What would it cost to dig your way back to the surface? The answers, I've learned, are written in the spaces between what we owe others and what we owe ourselves. Part 6. Open ending and reflection. The house smells like peonies now. I bought 6 pots of them, pink, white, coral, their petals spilling over the edges like confetti. Margaret would have hated them. Too messy, she'd say. Too loud. I water them every morning, dirt under my nails, and smile. Ethan and I meet every Thursday at a cafe, halfway between his apartment and the house. We order the same things, black coffee for him, chamomile tea for me, and talk about things we never did before. How his mother's silence feels like a bruise. How my therapist says boundaries are a form of love. Last week he admitted he'd never realized how much I'd paid toward his loans. $750, I told him. He choked on his coffee. Some days, I still wake up reaching for my phone, expecting a crisis, but the only texts now are from my mother, sending photos of her hospital co-workers in elaborate Halloween costumes, and Claire, who Venmo'd me $87.50 a week ago with the memo, baby steps. The dining room table, once polished to a high shine for Margaret's inspections, now holds my laptop and a stack of library books. I'm reading about women who built their own homes in the 1800s, their names carved into floorboards no one ever saw. Sometimes I run my fingers over the deed in my desk drawer, its edges softened by time. Olivia Bennet, it says, plain as daylight. No asterisks, no fine print. In December, I took the Bali trip, not the $1,500 honeymoon fund version, but my own. $3,800 charged to a new credit card with my name alone. I ate mangoes on the beach and didn't post a single photo. When I returned, Ethan asked if I'd met someone. I laughed until I cried. I met myself, I said. Turns out she's pretty good company. The family Christmas card arrived yesterday. They'd photoshopped me out of the old group photo, leaving a ghostly sliver of my elbow in the corner. I pinned it to the fridge next to a postcard from my mom. Proud of you, she'd written in her looping script. Your dad says the peonies look festive. I've started keeping a journal, not the gratitude kind therapists recommend, but a leather-bound thing where I write down all the things I used to swallow, the $500 gifts, the backhanded compliments, the way Margaret's perfume used to linger in my curtains for days. Yesterday's entry paid off the last of Ethan's student loans. He cried at the cafe. So did I. Not sure why. The house still echoes sometimes. In the empty guest room, I hear Margaret's laugh. In the kitchen, the clink of wine glasses from Thanksgiving's past. But the peonies are blooming wild by the patio, and when the wind blows, their scent drowns out the ghosts. Ethan asked last week if I'd ever consider selling. This place holds so much pain, he said. I shook my head. It holds my name, my sweat, my first real proof I existed. He didn't understand, but he nodded. Progress, I guess. I've started a new spreadsheet, Olivia's Life version 2.0. Line 1, Bali trip. Line 2, peonies, $47.99 and at Home Depot. Line 3, $78,000 in savings, untouched. Line 4, here's what I've learned. Love shouldn't cost $2,400 a month. Silence is a currency, and I'm done being rich in it. Forgiveness isn't a blanket, it's a thread. You decide where to weave it. But I still lie awake some nights wondering, if I hadn't owned the house, would they ever have seen me? If I forgive them, does that erase the $15,000? The cropped photos, the years of shrinking. If I stay with Ethan, will I always taste bitterness in my coffee? I don't know. What I do know, the peonies will bloom again next spring. My name is still on the deed, and somewhere out there a woman is reading this, measuring her worth by someone else's ruler. So, here's my question for you, the real reason I'm writing this. When they stop taking from you, when the noise fades and the balance sheets settle, who do you find standing in the quiet? Is she someone you recognize, someone you like? I'm still figuring that out. But for the first time, I'm curious to meet her. Maybe you are too.